I swear, if that SUV is still there, I'm milking my cows through the windshield. That was the line I muttered, bleary-eyed and barefoot in the morning dew, coffee in one hand and feed bucket in the other. But even I didn't believe I'd actually have to follow through until I turned the corner and saw it. There it was again, that shiny white Lexus SUV with a vanity plate Sophioni parked square across both my barn doors, like it was a valet drop-off at some five-star spa, not a 120-year-old dairy barn that smelled like hay, manure, and hard work. My cows, all 32 of them, were lowing in a chorus of frustration from inside, hooves clumping, udders full, and patience thin, just like mine. I stood there for a full minute, trying to decide if this was some kind of prank. Yesterday, it had been a passive-aggressive HOA letter stuffed under my windshield wiper, complaining that the visual pollution of your cattle fence is affecting nearby home values. The day before that, she left a homemade brochure titled Modern Solutions to Outdated Agricultural Habits. I'd laughed. Now, I wasn't laughing. Now she had physically blocked my entire morning operation. This wasn't just petty anymore, this was war. I wasn't one of the decorative elements she had in mind. I stomped over to her SUV, hoping she was still inside. Nope. Locked up tight, a sun hat on the dashboard, and a lukewarm frappuccino melting in the cufolder. The nerve of it. I circled the car twice just to confirm there was no way to maneuver a tractor around it without risking damage to the vehicle or, worse, one of my cows. And the cows were already on edge. Every minute they stayed in that barn, the pressure built, and not just in their udders. They needed out, they needed space, and I needed Sophia gone. So I called her, straight to voicemail. I didn't even get the luxury of hearing her voice, that fake sweet tone she always used at HOA meetings, as if she were reciting Bible verses, but each one was secretly about you being a burden on society. Next, I called the tow company. Gary, the guy who ran the local service, answered on the second ring. "Sorry, Tom," he said, not even waiting for me to explain. "We can't tow from HOA property unless it's on record as a safety hazard, and technically, her vehicle's on shared access gravel that overlaps both zones." "Gary," I growled, "she's got a 2-ton blockade over my barn doors. My cows are about to explode." "I get it, but unless it's a fire lane or you've got a police report." I hung up before he finished. That's when the sound started, the low, grumbly, utterly judgmental bellow of Clara, my lead cow. It wasn't just any moo. It was the kind of sound she made when she was minutes away from letting go, barn door open or not. I looked her dead in the eyes through the barn window and raised my hands in surrender. All right, I muttered. "Let's move the obstacle." The backup barn doors were at the rear of the property, facing the pasture. They were never used for morning release. They opened directly onto a steep, muddy hill, but desperate times and all. I headed to the garage, pulled on my boots, and jumped into the tractor cab. The engine roared to life like it had been waiting for a mission. I pulled around to the back of the barn, unlatched the heavy-duty chains from the wall, and hitched them to the frame. Sophia's car gleamed in the early morning light, all ceramic wax and smugness. She had to know what she was doing. No one parks directly in front of barn doors accidentally. I reversed the tractor until the tow strap was taut, then slowly started to pull. The SUV creaked as it moved, inch by inch, tires grinding against the gravel, and then mud good, real mud, the kind that didn't care about all-wheel drive. It took about 5 minutes to drag the thing around the barn and into the cow pen. I unhooked the chain, backed up the tractor, and parked it. Just in time, too. I opened the rear barn doors, and 32 cows bolted out like prisoners set free. Some galloped, some pranced, a few just sort of waddled with determination, but they all noticed the new shiny object in their domain. And cows, being curious and emotional animals, didn't take kindly to intrusions. Clara walked right up to the driver's side window, fogging it up with her breath. Lily nibbled the antenna. Mabel kicked mud onto the hood for no clear reason. And then, oh Lord, Rosie climbed halfway onto the rear bumper like she thought it was hay storage. By the time I climbed up to the barn loft to get a better look, the car was covered in cow slobber, hoof prints, and at least one fresh, steaming message from nature itself. I laughed harder than I had in weeks. Then I heard it. The shriek. A high-pitched, scandalized scream from the end of the driveway. Sophia had returned. She stood frozen, clutching her designer handbag like it was a life raft, her perfectly sprayed hair frizzing in the morning humidity, her eyes locked onto her vehicle, now proudly displayed in the muddiest corner of my cow pen, surrounded by living proof that nature has a sense of humor. She didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Then, with a dramatic stomp, she pointed at me and shouted, "This is vandalism. This is destruction of private property. This is a lawsuit." I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just raised my coffee mug, still warm, and called down, "Next time, maybe park in a visitor spot." Her jaw dropped. The cows mooed in what I swear sounded like applause, and somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. The morning chaos was far from over. Sophia didn't just stomp back to her Lexus and drive away in shame like a normal person might have. No, she stood there in her designer flats, now caked in cow dung, and called someone on her phone with the kind of urgent hysteria usually reserved for house fires or hostage situations. Her voice carried across the pen, shrill and escalating, words like criminal, health hazard, and property damage tossed around like confetti. Meanwhile, Clara leaned her full weight on the Lexus hood and let out a slow, satisfied groan. I half expected the windshield to cave in. I figured I had maybe 5 minutes before this escalated further, so I whistled the cows back toward the pasture, which was a chore in itself. Since the SUV had become the center of attention, Rosie refused to leave and had taken a real liking to licking the rearview mirror. I had to pull her away like a toddler being dragged from a candy store. Once they were clear, I opened the side gate and used the tractor to tow the SUV out of the pen. The thing looked like it had survived a barnyard apocalypse. Mud crusted along the wheel wells, smears of something brown and suspicious on the doors, a side mirror twisted halfway loose. I parked it just outside the gate and walked back up to the house. But Sophia wasn't done. Within the hour, 3 golf carts rolled up my gravel path, all bearing HOA insignias on the side panels like they were government vehicles. Sophia led the charge naturally, with 2 other board members in tow, Martha, who always wore an HOA badge around her neck like she was in the FBI, and Roger, who rarely said anything but nodded a lot to avoid conflict. They stopped just short of my porch, and Sophia dismounted her cart with the grace of a drama school dropout, preparing for a courtroom monologue. "This man," she began, voice pitched for theatrical projection, "has willfully damaged my personal vehicle, endangered community peace, and unleashed a swarm of aggressive livestock onto shared property." "Swarm?" I echoed from my porch chair, lifting my mug. "They're cows, not bees." Martha pulled out a clipboard and began reading from what I assumed was some kind of script. "According to subsection 14C of the Whispering Cedars Code of Conduct, animal containment must be maintained at all times to prevent intrusion onto communal driveways or borders." "My barn doors were blocked," I said, pointing. By her, Sophia took a threatening step forward. "That is shared gravel space. You don't own it." I stood up slowly, walked over to my fence, and tapped the brass boundary plaque that had been embedded in the wood since 1978. "Actually, I do. Every inch up to that water meter." "Your Lexus was 22 inches inside my line," I measured. Roger looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Sophia, meanwhile, turned beet red. "We'll see what the sheriff has to say about this," she snapped. "Already called him," I replied. "He said to document everything, so I did. Got the whole tow on video. Want me to send it to your insurance company?" Martha and Roger exchanged a brief look. Sophia noticed and immediately turned to them, whispering something sharp and fast. They nodded slowly, reluctantly. After a few more minutes of awkward threats and posturing, they got back in their carts and drove away. But I knew Sophia wasn't backing down. I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't over, if anything. I had just lit the fuse. Sure enough, the next morning I found a bright yellow violation notice taped to my fence. Non-conforming exterior paint color on structure roof. I stared at it in disbelief. The roof was barn red. It had always been barn red. It was called barn red for a reason. This was pure spite dressed up in bureaucratic language. Over the next few days, the violations came non-stop, one for excessive noise before 8:00 a.m., which I assumed referred to my rooster, Chester. One for improper signage, apparently my hand-carved welcome sign now offended community standards. Another for unapproved outdoor structures aimed at my chicken coop that had been there since the early 90s. It was a blitzkrieg of pettiness. I started keeping a folder labeled Sophia's War and filled it with every notice, every photo, every time-stamped video. I even installed an extra trail cam by the driveway. But the best piece of evidence came on day 4, when Sophia brought in reinforcements. That morning, I woke up to find a guy in a cheap security uniform standing at the entrance to my property. He was maybe in his late 20s, sunglasses too big for his face, and a clipboard tucked under one arm. When I approached, he held up a palm. "This is now a monitored access point," he said, like he was guarding a military base. "Per the HOA directive, non-approved commercial farm traffic must report before entering." "Son," I said, blinking at him, "you're standing on my driveway." He squinted at his clipboard. "We have reason to believe you're operating in violation of rural commercial boundaries." "You mean my feed truck? The same one that's been making deliveries every Friday for the past 15 years? He gave a stiff nod. "Still needs clearance. I can make a note." I didn't let him finish. I pulled out my phone and started recording. This man is standing on private property, attempting to obstruct legal access to a livestock operation. He has no badge number, no municipal authority, and no posted credentials. "If you don't remove yourself, I'll be contacting the sheriff." That got his attention. He took 2 steps back, muttered something about just doing his job, and disappeared down the road. 10 minutes later, I saw Sophia pacing her porch with her phone pressed to her ear, talking fast and angry. I imagined she didn't get the response she wanted. Still, I knew she'd be back with another scheme, and I had to be ready. So I called my niece Emma, who worked for the county as a livestock inspector and had a sharp nose for fraud. I asked her to swing by and give my farm a surprise inspection, not because I needed one, but because I wanted to prove that my animals were better cared for than most people's purebred poodles. She showed up 2 days later, clipboard in hand, boots on, and a camera crew in tow for some kind of community agriculture segment they were filming. Sophia was watching from her porch when Emma shook my hand and said, "Let's see these beauties." By the time the tour was done, Emma had given me the cleanest report possible. No issues, no concerns, and even a bonus commendation for enrichment efforts in the cow pasture. She made sure to say it loud enough for Sophia to hear, too. "I've seen petting zoos with worse conditions than this. Tom runs a model operation." Sophia's face was like a weather map mid-tornado. I could almost see the steam coming out of her ears. That was the day I realized I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was going to dig deeper, find her weak spot, and pull the whole thing down one legal rope at a time. Because you don't mess with a man's cows or his driveway, not without consequences. It started with a coffee-stained deed from 1963. I was sitting in the shed late one night, flipping through an old wooden file box that my dad used to keep land records in. It had sat undisturbed for over a decade, dusty and ignored. I didn't expect to find anything new, but with Sophia escalating things by the hour, I figured it wouldn't hurt to refresh myself on my boundaries and rights. I was looking for anything that could help me put a lid on her madness, or at least slow it down, and that's when I found it, a yellowed parcel map with faded ink, some corners missing, but the outline of the property still clear. What caught my eye wasn't my own borders. It was hers. Sophia's brand new house and circular driveway sat smack on top of what used to be an access road, one that was technically marked on this map as a deeded utility easement, a strip of land that still, by all legal rights, belonged to my family. At first, I thought maybe the subdivision had bought it out and updated the records, but when I pulled the county parcel registry and checked online, the easement was never officially removed, never even mentioned in the HOA's original development plan. Suddenly it clicked. Sophia's whole house might be sitting partially on land she didn't actually own, or at the very least, that fancy curved driveway of hers, the one she used to block half the shared road, was illegally overlapping my property. And that gave me leverage, real leverage, the kind she couldn't fine, silence, or scream away. The next morning, I called up an old buddy of mine, Jack Merriman, a retired surveyor who lived about an hour out. He owed me a favor for helping rescue his horse trailer from a ditch during a storm a few years back. Jack showed up in his old Chevy truck, grinning like he already knew it was going to be a good day. We spent most of the afternoon walking the property with stakes and GPS gear. Jack double-checked every inch and confirmed what I suspected. Sophia's entire front landscaping, driveway, and a good chunk of her fountain installation sat at least 6 feet into my old easement strip. Technically, she was not only on my land, but had altered it without a permit, without a lease, and without a word to to anyone. In other words, she was trespassing, civil trespassing, sure, but trespassing all the same. And I had the documentation to prove it. I didn't rush. I didn't go knocking on her door with papers in hand and steam in my ears. No, I wanted this to unfold slowly, methodically, like watching a fuse burn its way toward a box of fireworks. The next step was legal notice. I worked with a local title attorney, got a cease and desist letter drafted, and requested a formal boundary review with the county zoning office. The attorney also filed a notification with the HOA's board, informing them that a member was in violation of municipal land use laws and requesting immediate removal of any encroachments. When Sophia received the notice, she didn't explode like I expected. She imploded. For 2 full days, she didn't leave the house. No HOA patrols, no violations taped to my gate, no mall cop security guards with clipboards. The neighborhood felt peaceful for once. Even the cows were confused. But by day 3, the storm reappeared, and it brought reinforcements. Sophia didn't just argue, she mobilized. Flyers appeared on mailboxes with bold red lettering reading, "Urgent, farmer disrupting community peace." She held an emergency HOA meeting on her front lawn, complete with folding chairs, lemonade, and a whiteboard labeled "Take Back Our Streets." About 15 people showed up, half of them clearly unsure why they were there, the other half just there for the free cookies. I watched from my porch with a cold soda in hand, amused by the sight of her pointing at crude maps and trying to convince people that my cows were domestic terrorists. But the turning point came when she tried to rally the HOA board against me again. Only this time the cracks started to show. Roger, the quiet nodder, declined to attend the meeting. Martha, the clipboard warrior, arrived late and stood off to the side with her arms crossed. And then something unexpected happened. Harlan Mathis, the vice president of the HOA and longtime resident of Whispering Cedars, raised his hand and asked a single question. "Sophia, did you get a permit for your driveway extension?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd heard all day. Sophia stuttered, tried to change the subject, mumbled something about grandfather clauses, and then quickly moved on to complaining about my tractor again. But the damage was done. Seeds of doubt had been planted. That night, I received an anonymous envelope in my mailbox, no return address, just a plain manila folder. Inside were printouts, screenshots from HOA board group messages, Sophia's own words copied and pasted from private threads. In them, she complained that my land smelled like wet death, called my barn an eyesore, and suggested the HOA should find a way to condemn it for safety reasons. But what stood out most was a message time-stamped 2 weeks earlier, where she said, "I parked in front of his barn, on purpose. He needs a taste of controlled society." I read it twice, then a third time. I didn't need to wonder who sent it. Someone on that board had finally grown a spine, probably Harlan, maybe even Martha. Whoever it was, they had just handed me the golden ticket. I passed it along to my attorney, who included it in the file with the county. Then I wrote a respectful, clear summary and dropped off copies of the screenshots to every house on the cul-de-sac, just the facts. No commentary, no accusations, just letting the neighborhood see who they had put in charge of their community standards. The results were swift. The very next day, I heard a loud crash around noon. Sophia's driveway fountain, the one shaped like a Greek goddess holding a crystal orb, had been smashed to pieces. The HOA had removed it under emergency code compliance, citing illegal encroachment on a non-residential zone. I didn't lift a finger. I just watched through my kitchen window as a crew jackhammered the base out of the ground and carted the debris away in a dump truck. Sophia came out screaming, waving her phone, threatening lawsuits again. But this time, no one stopped to listen. A neighbor across the street actually clapped. Later that week, the HOA board quietly posted a notice that they'd be reviewing member conduct and leadership standards. And Sophia? She began parking her car in her garage for the first time since she'd moved in. No more HOA patrols, no more printed notices, just silence. But I wasn't finished, not yet. She may have backed off for now, but I knew Sophia. She didn't give up. She regrouped. So I prepared the next phase, one that would hit her where it really hurt. Because if she wanted to play hardball, I had just the plan, one involving cows, cameras, and a community event no one would ever forget. The idea came to me one evening while I was out in the pasture, leaning against the fence with Clara chewing cud beside me, the sunset painting everything gold. I watched the neighborhood beyond the trees, the perfectly trimmed hedges, matching mailboxes, those synthetic-looking plastic flamingos that Sophia had once handed out as part of a mandatory seasonal decor initiative. The contrast between their world and mine was almost comical. She had spent weeks trying to tear down the spirit of this land, and now the neighborhood was starting to turn on her. I didn't just want to win the fight. I wanted to remind everyone why people used to want to live near farms, why the country charm mattered. So I started planning the one thing Sophia would never see coming: a community farm day. It started innocently enough. I printed out flyers titled "Open Pasture," "A Day at the Farm," "Neighbors Welcome," and tacked them on every HOA-approved bulletin board and mailbox post I could find. I even left one at the clubhouse pool, right next to Sophia's laminated list of acceptable towel colors. The flyer promised hayrides, cow milking demonstrations, farm fresh snacks, and a raffle for a year's supply of local eggs. Nothing controversial, nothing political, just a wholesome invitation to enjoy the land Sophia had spent months trying to erase. And I made sure to get all the permits beforehand, just in case she tried to shut it down with some bogus regulation. To my surprise, people were excited. More than a few came by in the days leading up to it, asking if they could help set up. I had high school kids offering to do face painting, retirees volunteering to run the lemonade stand, and even the town librarian, Miss S. Bell, asking if she could do a storytime reading in the shade under the big oak tree. The support poured in. People were hungry for something real, something grounded. I made it clear it was open to everyone, even Sophia. On the morning of the event, the weather was perfect, clear skies, soft breeze, and the smell of freshly cut hay in the air. I'd gotten up before dawn to brush the cows, rake the yard, and hang up signs along the road that pointed toward the pasture gate. My niece Emma brought a couple of vet friends who set up a little education station about farm animals. I even convinced Jack, my surveyor buddy, to man the grill. He wore an apron that said Certified Meat Inspector and laughed like a madman every time someone asked for a hot dog. The crowd began to arrive in waves: families, older couples, teenagers with nothing better to do. Everyone smiled, everyone laughed. Kids ran wild through the field, dodging chickens and trying to get close to the calves. It was everything I'd hoped for, except, of course, for the storm cloud I knew was coming. Right on cue, Sophia showed up around noon. She wore an all-white pantsuit and oversized sunglasses, like she was walking onto a yacht. In one hand, she clutched her phone, and in the other, a printed binder that probably contained her latest legal threat. She didn't walk so much as march across the lawn, heels sinking slightly into the soft dirt, as she made a beeline for the main tent. I met her halfway, still wearing my overalls, hands coated in straw dust and cow slobber. "This is unauthorized," she hissed, holding up the binder like it was a sacred relic. "You're violating at least 5 community ordinances, not to mention the noise and smell thresholds outlined in section." I cut her off with a smile. All permits filed. Sheriff's Department signed off. Zoning office gave the green light, and the HOA board was invited weeks ago. "Would you like a hot dog?" Sophia blinked, lips twitching. Behind her, 2 teenagers were giggling and pointing. One of them was wearing a shirt with a cartoon cow on it that said, "Sophia can't move a me." I'd had them printed as a joke. Apparently they'd caught on. Sophia spun around, horrified. As a camera crew rounded the corner, it was the local news station, there to cover rural revitalization and community engagement. They interviewed me by the old well, while a line of children waited to pet a sleepy goat named Buckles. Sophia hovered in the background, desperately trying to get their attention, but they ignored her. She made one last attempt to shut it all down by cornering Harlan from the HOA board. I watched from afar as she waved her binder in his face. He stood calm, arms crossed, and after a few minutes, shook his head and walked away. The crowd had already made up its mind. Sophia wasn't the voice of the neighborhood anymore. Her authority was gone, her influence fading, and she knew it. But fate wasn't quite done with her. As she stormed across the field to leave, she didn't notice Chester, the rooster, had wandered onto the trail. She tripped over him, flailing forward, arms flapping like she was trying to take flight. She landed directly in a wheelbarrow full of fresh compost, letting out a squawk that rivaled Chester himself. Gasps turned into laughter. Someone caught the entire thing on video. It was online within hours under the title HOA Sophia Gets a Taste of Farm Life. The view count was in the tens of thousands by nightfall. She left the event in silence, covered in dirt and rage, her binder bent and smeared with cow prints. No one offered to help her up. That night, as the last guests left and the cleanup wrapped up, I sat back under the oak tree with a cold drink in hand. The cows lay peacefully in the grass. The stars were starting to peek out, and for once, the air felt still. No patrols, no complaints, just the hum of crickets and the faint sound of someone laughing down the road. Maybe Sophia would try one more desperate move. Maybe she'd even find a lawyer to rattle some sabers. But something had changed. People had seen the truth with their own eyes. The farm wasn't the enemy, she was. And even if she didn't move out tomorrow, the HOA board already had a special session planned. Her days of power were numbered. But me? I had one more trick left in the barn, one final move to lock it all in. And it was going to be the one story no one in Whispering Cedars would ever forget. 3 days after the farm day, I got a letter slid under my door. It wasn't from the county or the sheriff or even the HOA. It was from Sophia herself. The envelope was white, thick, probably from some overpriced stationery set. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed out in bold, all-caps font, like she was trying to shout through the page. You have until Friday to remove all traces of the farm day event, or I will be pursuing legal action on grounds of community degradation, property value impact, and emotional distress. It was the kind of letter that would make a nervous person call a lawyer. But I wasn't nervous. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was sad. After everything, that was her big final move, a half-baked threat and an angry font. What Sophia didn't realize was that she'd already lost the war. The farm day had shifted everything. People who had once blindly followed her were now actively avoiding her. I saw a neighbor cross the street to not walk past her porch. The HOA message board was suddenly quiet, and her usual swarm of passive-aggressive lawn violation notices had all but disappeared. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more move, something I'd been saving for the perfect moment, something that would seal the whole thing like a bow on top of a box labeled, "Don't ever mess with a man and his barn again." That perfect moment came on a Sunday morning. It was sunny, with a cool breeze, a kind of stillness in the air that makes you feel like something's about to shift. I waited until I saw Sophia step outside to grab her newspaper, and then I wheeled it into place, the new sign. I had crafted it out of reclaimed barnwood, carved the letters by hand, and painted them with a bright red stencil brush. The letters were tall, bold, impossible to miss. Private farm access only. Park here and YOULL be milked. I nailed it right to the old post where she had once taped her HOA rules. I stood back and admired it while sipping my morning coffee. Sophia read it, jaw clenching, face going 3 shades of red, before she slammed her door so hard it made her wind chime scream. But the real final move wasn't the sign. It was the petition. I had quietly passed it around after the farm event. It was simple, clear, and totally legal. We, the undersigned residents of Whispering Cedars, request the removal of Sophia Wentworth from her position as HOA president due to misuse of authority, harassment of residents, and behavior detrimental to community morale. I'd needed 30 signatures. I got 52, including some names that shocked even me. Martha, Roger, the entire McCormick family who used to host wine tastings with Sophia, even her next-door neighbor Sandra, who had once defended Sophia's rule book like it was scripture, had signed with a little note beside her name. Enough is enough. I submitted it officially at the next HOA board meeting. Sophia was there, of course, dressed like she was running for mayor, pearls and all. She walked in with her usual swagger and stack of printouts, ready to command the room, but the room didn't rise to meet her. They barely even looked her way. I handed the petition to Harlan in front of everyone. He read it silently, then nodded once without drama, without theatrics. He folded it, placed it in a folder and said, "We'll schedule the vote next week." Sophia's eyes darted around the room, like she was searching for backup. No one moved, not even Roger. She cleared her throat, tried to launch into a speech about dangerous precedents and rural overreach, but Harlan cut her off with a quiet hand. "Sophia," he said, "let's just let the neighborhood speak." And speak it did. By the end of the week, the results were posted on the HOA website. 87% of residents voted for her removal, effective immediately. Sophia was no longer president. She didn't take it gracefully. She didn't hold a farewell speech. She didn't even post one of her long-winded bulletins. She simply vanished for 3 days. No one saw her leave the house. Then, one morning, a moving truck pulled into her driveway. Over the next 6 hours, they loaded her furniture, artwork, her porch urns, even the remains of the shattered fountain she'd insisted on keeping. I watched from the same fence I'd leaned on with Clara the night the idea first came to me. When she finally emerged, sunglasses on, lips tight, she didn't look at anyone. She got into her Lexus, freshly cleaned but still bearing faint scratches on the fenders from its visit to the cow pen, and drove away. Just like that, she was gone. The peace that followed was more than silence. It was the return of something that had been missing since the HOA had started acting like it owned everything. People waved more. Kids rode bikes again without worrying about getting notes about helmet reflectors. The guy down the road started hosting weekend cookouts and invited me to bring fresh milk for his wife's famous cornbread. Things felt like a neighborhood again, not a gated system of punishment. A few weeks later, a new couple moved into Sophia's old house. Nice folks. She teaches art at the local high school. He works at the co-op hardware store. Their kids came by to see the cows and left with fresh eggs on their first day. The wife asked me about the sign. I told her the short version of the story, the cleaner version. She laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes. That evening I sat on my porch again, sun dipping low, barn lights flickering on, the cows settling into their routine. I looked out at the gravel path that had once been the battleground and saw only peace, no Lexus, no screaming, no clipboards, just quiet, good air, and the comforting weight of knowing I'd stood my ground, protected my way of life, and done it without stooping to her level. The old tow strap I used on her car still hung on a hook inside the barn, just above the milking station, not as a warning, just a reminder that sometimes the only thing standing between chaos and calm is a farmer with a tractor, a sense of humor, and a whole lot of cows. And if any future HOA president ever forgets that, well, I still have that sign, and the cows never forget.